From Washington, D.C., the Department of Justice's Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the American Bar Association Commission on Youth at Risk, and the Department of Health and Human Services Family and Youth Services Bureau present Addressing the Needs of Juvenile Status Offenders and Their Families.
Children and youth that we refer to as status offenders are among the most important groups of children that we encounter in our work. Research indicates that without an appropriate response, there's an increased likelihood that these youth will move on to commit more serious offenses and end up in the delinquency and criminal justice system. In addition, status offenders, in particular runaway and truant youth, are vulnerable and at increased risk of being hurt or victimized. When parents and those responsible for their care are not sufficiently engaged and playing the appropriate role, supervising their conduct and helping them make good decisions, their lives can spin out of control quickly. As administrator of OJJDP, I also want to emphasize how important it is that status offenders and their families receive appropriate community-based interventions. For example, faith-based and community organizations are a good resource since their staff, members, and volunteers often live and work in the same community and have faced many of the same challenges. They're often able to come alongside and support families as they make needed changes. As you may know, OJJDP's guiding legislation, the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, prohibits the placement of status offenders in secure detention. Yet, not only is it a violation of the JJDP Act to hold status offenders in detention, we also know that it simply does not work. Detaining status offenders puts them at increased risk of becoming more deeply entrenched in the juvenile justice system. It also exposes these status offenders to greater risks and negative influences.
Juvenile status offenses are non-criminal offenses committed by children or youth that, if committed by an adult, would not be a crime. Examples of juvenile status offenses include running away, being ungovernable or out of a parent's control, truancy, violating curfew laws, possession of alcohol or tobacco, and non-criminal traffic offenses. In 2004, police made over 400,000 arrests for status offenses, accounting for about 18% of all juvenile arrests that year.
Petition number 283.
In 1996, juvenile courts formally handled approximately 160,000 status offense cases. This is an increase of 101% in formally handled status offense cases since 1980. But many state and county status offense systems lack programs, services, or resources to help children and their families with problems. Judges sometimes have few options but to take a child out of the home, even when he or she poses no threat to public safety. This often leads to negative outcomes, including victimization, increased family tension, reduced involvement in school, and an increased likelihood of becoming more deeply involved in the juvenile justice and criminal justice system.
Juvenile status offenders live in the twilight world of our juvenile system. They're not a perfect fit for our child welfare system, which protects children from abuse, abandonment, and neglect, or for our juvenile justice system, which addresses youngsters charged with criminal behavior. Many states and localities struggle to respond appropriately and effectively.
Opinion, in my professional experience, truancy, the biggest problem which causes truancy is lack of academic achievement. The kids by 5th, 6th, 7th grade, they don't know how to read, they can't keep up, they're embarrassed. These are the kids that will, if called upon in class, will cause a disruption to avoid not being called on and avoid not being teased by peers. I do believe that you can see from kindergarten on, if you follow these students, that there is some rates of absenteeism from kindergarten on, and we all know 5-, 6-, and 7-year-olds are not voluntarily avoiding school. It's that home education isn't important enough to get up and get your child to school. And if we had some interventions at that time, perhaps we could get these kids on the right path. I think lack of find out if some of these kids need have special needs, and they have learning disabilities or some type of issues that are preventing them from learning appropriately, and yet they're passed from grade to grade to grade and not held back or not tested for some extra educational opportunities, extra learning experiences. I also feel a big part as they get older is the peer pressure and bullying. The gangs make kids that are not involved in the gangs afraid to go to school. They're afraid they'll be beat up. I've heard stories of gang members going into schools or being part of the school and going to a classroom to wait till a particular student is leaving the classroom to threaten and harass them because they may not be willing to join the gang. So a lot of these are predictors of future delinquent behavior and reasons why they're not going to school.
Okay, Ken.
Well done what Ms. Ennis just said, actually. If you look back, 1950, for every 100 kids born in America, that year, 12 kids entered a broken family. Fast forward to today, for every 100 kids born into America, 60 kids enter a broken family. So American kids are experiencing a lot more rejection between the parents. That affects them, leads essentially to either depression or anger. The anger gets acted out. The depression, actually underneath the depression is anger too, clinically, if you look at it. So we have more and more families that are not places where children really belong or feel they belong, or there's lots of conflict, all of which make the child try to seek a place to belong outside, or definitely to get out of where he doesn't feel or she feels she does not belong. And that's the flight from conflict, the flight from breakdown.
Okay. You know, we have
good research, and it's fairly recent, but it's based on a large population of 1,500 students that were followed for 20 years. And I think based on the veracity of this research, we can finally say that we have this kind of connection that we've always known and always observed. But we also have what's called a linear relationship, which means the greater the truancy, the greater the likelihood of these bad outcomes. And the bad outcomes specifically that were studied is that the onset of a serious assault crime for just a class skipper who misses a few classes, not chronically truant, they have 4 times the likelihood of committing an assault, all the way up to as much as 12 times as likely for the chronic truant of committing an assault. When we look at property crimes, we see similar things where the class skipper is maybe 4 times as likely to be committing property crimes, and for chronic truants, it's 22 times as likely to commit property crimes. When those kids are not in school, they're getting into trouble. They're committing these property crimes. All of these stats apply to kids from 12 to 15. These are not high school kids. These are mostly middle school kids.
Okay.
We've decided that we will not have status offenders in detention. To accomplish such, you know, the community, the judges, the judiciary, the law enforcement, families, everybody, because when JDAI is actively involved, our goal is system reform, not just the creation of an alternative. So we don't want to throw an alternative at a problem or a situation. We want to use this collaborative to determine and look at the data. What information do we have about the kids who are appearing in this court system? What do we have about these juveniles? And we want to use that data. We also want to look at policies. We want to look at practices and sometimes the roughest part, adult behavior. Because in many ways, it's our behavior that contributes to the fact. Absolutely. And so the data drives those decisions, and the data helps us determine the target, proper population. However, data in itself is not enough. You have to look at objective screening processes. So we want to make sure that the alternatives designed are based on the risk that the kids present. Be the alternative home detention, day and evening reporting centers, shelter care. Again, those alternatives need to be designed with data in mind. And while I won't have time to talk about how the nuances and the ways that all of those work specifically, my advice to jurisdictions as they proceed, or states or counties that want to develop alternatives, make sure that the alternatives are based on data. Use information to determine what's necessary to those kids in those communities. Not only that, make sure it addresses the population it's designed to address. And in addition, that it meets the goal that is established to meet.
Cities similar to Orange County changed their front door of their system, and rather than put a community-based program, they decided to put the social service government agency, the Administration of Children's Services, as their referral source, sort of, again, the gatekeeper for the PINS intakes. These are master-level social workers who respond within 24 to 48 hours of referrals, and they work through a family-focused model, really deciding what links the family needs to other community-based programs. Again, to highlight sort of the power of data and looking at how these programs are working. Since the inception of that program, PINS intakes to probation have decreased by 80%, court referrals have decreased by 50%, and the use of out-of-home placement pending adjudication has decreased by up to 34%. Now, these are only two local reform examples, but they really highlight a trend that's happening throughout the state. And in fact, in April 2005, New York State codified these changes in legislative reforms. And what the legislative reforms essentially do are endorse both the program and policy trends that I've just described in two jurisdictions.
So I guess First Lady Laura Bush, who has an important message for you about this very important initiative.
Challenges young people face aren't limited to one community or to one segment of society. Boys and girls in every community need our help to succeed in school, to avoid the dangers of alcohol and drugs, and to stay away from gangs. Adults have a profound influence on children, and young people want us in their lives. Caring adults offer guidance, support, and stability for boys and girls as they grow up. And adults serve as role models, people children can look up to and say, I want to be just like him or just like her. Parents, teachers, coaches, clergy, and mentors can contribute to a young person's success. All it takes is the commitment to spend time with a child. Talk with children about the challenges they face. In communities throughout America, adults like you are guiding boys and girls toward a more hopeful future. These children will be grateful to you throughout their lives, and your example will inspire other Americans to help children in their communities.
At the outcomes. If we're not making a difference, then we shouldn't be in the business.
Okay. Remember that the youth of America is our future. We all have a part to play in steering these youth and their families in a positive direction. It's in our self-interest to ensure that our youth win. If they don't, we all lose.
Of course, there is no single answer, no single program that will put a child on the right path. At a certain point, the child must decide to change his behavior. Also, any effort must be individualized and targeted both at key people in the child's life as well as the child. Extending a helping hand to a child can make all the difference. As President Bush has said, it's a mosaic of programs, all stimulated because people have decided to do something about the problem. And it's really the uniqueness of the country. You are part of that mosaic. Working together, we can make a positive and critical difference in the lives of many of this nation's children, youth, and families.